This is the story of Henry, a gardener who spent his whole life taking care of someone else's paradise and ended up accused of burning it to the ground. Imagine giving 30 years of your life to a place, knowing every tree, every root, every stone, and then watching it all go up in flames while the police put the blame on you. Henry wasn't a saint, but he wasn't an arsonist either. Prison should have broken him, but instead, behind those walls, he created something no one expected, a garden. Not just flowers in the dirt, but a living protest against the concrete and iron around him. The story spread, reporters came, and soon the whole country was asking the same question. If Henry was guilty, why would he build life in a place meant to kill it? And when new evidence surfaced, the truth hit harder than any fire. It wasn't Henry who destroyed the estate. It was the heirs who wanted to cash out. This is not a fairy tale. It's a confession, a survival story, and a reminder that even in the darkest place, life has a way of breaking through. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this, raw, painful, but real. I never thought my life would be reduced to a headline. Local gardener charged with arson. That was the line they used. Like I was some lunatic who'd been waiting for the right moment to torch the very place I'd spent most of my life protecting. My name is Henry, and for almost 30 years I worked at the Whitmore estate in Connecticut. I was the gardener, the man with dirt under his fingernails and a permanent bend in his back from hauling mulch and trimming hedges. I knew every tree and plant on that land. Hell, I planted half of them myself. That place was my life, even if it never really belonged to me. The Whitmores were old money. You know the type. Crystal glasses, private schools, family portraits that looked more like oil paintings than photographs. They treated me politely, I guess, though I was always just Henry, the gardener. Invisible until something went wrong with the lawn or the roses. I didn't expect more. I wasn't bitter. I found my peace in the soil. People leave you alone when you're pruning bushes. Plants don't judge you or lie to your face. That was enough for me. The fire started on a humid night in July. I woke up to the sound of sirens and the smell of smoke thick enough to choke on. I ran outside and saw the main house already half swallowed by flames. The sky glowed orange. I grabbed a bucket like an idiot, throwing water on walls that were already collapsing. Neighbors stood at the edge of the property, whispering, watching the spectacle. When the firefighters finally arrived, I just stood there, soaked in sweat and ash, staring at the ruin of the place I had devoted my life to. The next morning, the questions started. Detectives showed up, asking where I was, if I'd seen anyone, if I kept fuel around. Of course I did. Every gardener does. Gasoline for the mower, kerosene for the trimmers. They searched my shed and found a couple of half-empty cans. To them, that was enough. A week later, they cuffed me in front of everyone. No one from the Whitmore family defended me. Not one word. I saw Mrs. Whitmore in court, dressed in black like she was attending a funeral, staring at me as if she already believed I'd done it. Maybe it was easier for them that way, to let me take the fall instead of digging into their own dirty laundry. The trial was a joke. The prosecutor painted me as some resentful old man who snapped after years of being treated like a servant. They said I had motive, opportunity, and access. My lawyer, a tired public defender, told me to take a plea deal. I refused. I couldn't confess to something I didn't do, but my refusal didn't matter. The jury took one look at the cans of gasoline, the photographs of the ruins, and the Whitmores sitting there in silent grief, and that was that. Guilty. Arson. 10 years. When the judge read the sentence, I felt like the air had been punched out of me. 10 years might as well have been a death sentence for someone my age. They led me out in shackles. The last thing I saw before the doors closed was the Whitmore son smirking in the back row. That look stuck with me. Something about it didn't fit the grief act they'd all been putting on. It was like he knew something I didn't. Prison isn't like what you see on TV. It's boring most of the time, which is worse than scary. Endless concrete, metal bars, and the constant noise of men trying to make themselves bigger than they are. I kept my head down. I wasn't tough, I wasn't young, and I had no illusions about surviving by fighting. My only advantage was that most people didn't notice me. I was just another old man doing time. The yard was where I found my escape. A patch of dirt surrounded by fences topped with razor wire. Nothing grew there, just weeds and dust. But I would sit on the bench, staring at the ground, thinking about the estate gardens, about the roses and the maples, about how the soil felt alive under my hands. I started scratching at the dirt with a plastic spoon I'd stolen from the cafeteria, just to feel something familiar. At first, the guards laughed. Inmates joked that I was trying to dig my way out like in some old movie. But I wasn't digging for freedom. I was digging because I couldn't stop myself. Soil calls to you when you've worked with it your whole life. It didn't take long before I had a little patch cleared, and I managed to sneak some seeds from the kitchen, tomato seeds, pepper seeds, even apple cores I dried out and split open. I planted them, watered them with leftover juice, guarded them like they were treasure. And one day, a sprout came up. A tiny green thing pushing through the dirt. You'd think I'd won the lottery the way I stared at it. In a place built to crush you, that little plant felt like rebellion. Something alive in a dead place. I didn't know it then, but that sprout was going to change everything. The first sprout was nothing more than a green dot in the middle of brown dirt, but for me it was proof that I wasn't finished yet. Most guys in prison pass their time lifting weights, gambling, or trying to carve out a reputation. I planted seeds. It wasn't noble. It wasn't some conscious decision to rise above. It was survival. I needed something to care for, or else I was going to disappear into the concrete like everyone else. Word spread quickly. In prison, nothing stays secret for long. Some laughed at me. They called it Grandpa's Sandbox, said I was losing my mind. But others started watching. Even the toughest guys have memories of life outside of backyards, of fresh tomatoes, of something other than processed food and metal trays. Slowly, curiosity replaced mockery. They wanted to see if anything could really grow in that wasteland. The guards noticed too. At first, they threatened to shut it down. They said no personal projects, no unapproved activity. But one of them, a younger officer, stopped me one day and asked what I was planting. I told him tomatoes. He didn't say anything, just nodded and walked off. A week later, I found an old plastic watering can by the fence. I never asked questions. Not everyone in uniform wanted to see me fail. By the second month, my little patch turned into a small garden. Tomatoes, peppers, beans, anything I could scavenge from kitchen scraps or trade for with inmates who worked in the cafeteria. I used coffee grounds to enrich the soil, crumbled eggshells when I could get them. It wasn't perfect, but the plants grew. And when the first tomato ripened, red and heavy in my hand, the yard went silent. A group of inmates gathered around, staring at it like it was gold. I cut it into slices with a plastic knife and handed pieces out. Nobody laughed anymore. They chewed slowly, savoring the taste of something fresh, something alive. For a moment, we weren't prisoners. We were just men in a garden. The garden kept expanding. Others started helping me, not because they cared about me, but because they wanted in on it. Some watered the plants when I couldn't. Some brought seeds. Some just sat nearby, watching. It became a kind of neutral ground. Gangs that would normally be at each other's throats would stand side by side to check on a row of beans. The garden didn't erase violence or hatred, but it created a pause, a fragile space where men remembered they were human. The warden eventually came down to see it for himself. He was a strict man, always suspicious, always thinking 10 steps ahead. He stood by the fence, looking at the rows of plants, and asked me why I was doing it. I told him the truth, because I had nothing else. He stared at me for a while, then left without saying a word. The next week, I got approval to keep it going. Not official, but clear enough. No one stopped me after that. Reporters first heard about it through a guard who mentioned it offhand during a local interview about prison conditions. A garden behind bars, they called it. Soon, journalists started showing up, asking for permission to see it. At first, the prison said no. But eventually, someone must have realized it made for good publicity, rehabilitation, hope, all that crap. So they let a reporter in. She took photos of me kneeling in the dirt, hands filthy, plants behind me. She asked questions I didn't want to answer. Why did you start it? What does it mean to you? Do you regret what you did? That last one hit me hardest. Because I did regret things, just not the crime they said I committed. I regretted trusting the Whitmores, believing that years of loyalty meant anything to them. I regretted not fighting harder during the trial. But I didn't regret this garden. It was the only thing keeping me alive. The story ran in a local paper, then in bigger outlets. Suddenly, I was the prison gardener, a novelty act. The photos spread online. People loved the idea of beauty in a place built for punishment. They romanticized it. They didn't see the nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I would die inside those walls. They didn't feel the weight of being called an arsonist, of being treated like a criminal when I knew I wasn't. But the garden gave them something simple to hold on to, and I let them have it. Letters started coming in. Strangers wrote to me about how the garden inspired them. Teachers sent drawings from children who wanted to visit someday. People donated seeds and tools, though most never made it past the warden's office. It was strange, being seen after a lifetime of invisibility. For years I was just the gardener, unnoticed in the background. Now, locked in a cage, the world suddenly cared. But attention is dangerous. The more people looked at me, the more I knew someone out there might start asking the wrong questions. And if the Whitmores had really set me up, as that smirk on the son's face suggested, then the truth wasn't buried as deep as they hoped. And that terrified me almost as much as it gave me hope. The first time I saw my face in a newspaper, I nearly laughed. There I was, dirty hands cradling a tomato like it was a newborn. The headline called me the prison gardener. They made me sound like some kind of folk hero, a symbol of redemption. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man serving time for a crime he didn't commit, clinging to a patch of dirt because it was the only thing keeping me sane. But the outside world doesn't care about the full picture. They want a story they can hold in their hands, something that makes them feel good about humanity. And I gave them that, whether I meant to or not. The media attention snowballed. Local news stations covered it, then national outlets. They sent in reporters with expensive cameras and rehearsed sympathy. They asked about the garden, about the inmates, about rehabilitation. But some of them asked more pointed questions. One journalist in particular, a woman named Claire, kept circling back to the fire. She asked how it felt to lose the estate I'd spent my life caring for, what my relationship with the Whitmores had been like, whether I thought they believed I was guilty. I wanted to shut down. Talking about the fire was like digging into a wound that never healed. But something about her persistence made me hesitate. She didn't look at me like I was a criminal. She looked at me like she already suspected there was more to the story. When the interview was over, she slipped me a note in the stack of letters fans had sent. It said, "I don't think you did it. Let me prove it." That note haunted me. In prison, hope is dangerous. It eats at you. You can't afford to believe someone might save you, because most of the time no one will. But I couldn't throw it away. I hid it inside one of my seed packets and read it again and again, wondering if I was a fool for believing. Weeks passed, and I didn't hear from her again. Then one day, a guard handed me a manila envelope. Inside were photocopies of documents, insurance claims, financial records, and a transcript of a statement made by one of the Whitmore heirs. According to Claire's notes, the estate had been drowning in debt. The fire happened just weeks before the family collected a massive insurance payout. The heir's statement, given to police, was strangely rehearsed, almost too perfect. Claire had highlighted parts that didn't line up with the timeline of the fire. Reading those pages made me feel sick. Not because I was shocked, but because I'd suspected it all along. The smirk on the son's face during my sentencing, the way none of them fought to defend me, the speed with which they threw me under the bus, it all made sense now. They needed a scapegoat, and I was convenient. The loyal gardener, too old, too invisible, too replaceable. Claire started visiting me regularly after that. She'd sit across from me in the visiting room, a tape recorder between us, asking questions no one else ever had. What did I remember about that night? Who had access to the tool shed? Had I ever noticed tensions within the family? I answered carefully, afraid to hope too much, but each meeting chipped away at the wall of silence around my case. The other inmates started noticing the extra attention I was getting. Some resented it, said I was playing the system for sympathy. Others respected it, as if being on TV gave me some kind of status. The garden, once just a patch of dirt, became something bigger, a stage. Visitors came to see it, prison officials bragged about it, and the men inside treated it like a rare place where the world outside still touched ours. But the more the story grew, the more pressure built. I got a letter from a law firm offering to take my case pro bono, citing new public interest. At the same time, I started getting threats. Notes slipped under my cell door, warnings scratched onto the walls of the bathroom. One said, "Stop talking. You'll regret it." I didn't know if those threats came from inside the prison or from people connected to the Whitmores. But they chilled me. Because they confirmed one thing, someone out there was scared of the truth coming out. Claire didn't back off. She dug deeper. She found records of the Whitmores fighting over money, arguments with contractors, suspiciously high insurance coverage added just months before the fire. She told me she was close to convincing her editor to run a full exposé. I told her to be careful. She just smiled and said, "The truth is worth it." For the first time since the fire, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel: anger. Not the dull ache of regret, but pure, focused rage. Rage that they had stolen years of my life, that they had let me rot in a cell while they cashed their checks. And beneath that rage, something else started to grow, the faint but undeniable possibility that maybe, just maybe, the truth would finally set me free. But I also knew the Whitmores weren't going to let their empire crumble without a fight. And if Claire kept pushing, she might be the one to pay the price before I ever walked out of those gates. The garden had become my whole world, but outside those walls, Claire was building a different one. Each visit, she brought more papers, more proof that the Whitmores weren't victims of a fire, but architects of it. She showed me the insurance documents signed just weeks before the blaze that tripled the policy on the estate. She found records of unpaid debts, lawsuits, and a foreclosure notice that had been quietly buried. Piece by piece, she laid the truth out like puzzle parts, and I could see the picture forming. But the most damning evidence came from a man no one expected. One of the contractors who had been hired to do renovations on the estate before the fire reached out to Claire. He claimed the Whitmore son had approached him about safety modifications that didn't make sense, reinforcing certain beams with materials that burned faster, installing wiring that was faulty by design. The man had refused, but he kept the emails. They showed intent, premeditation. Claire's hands shook as she slid the copies across the table to me. "This is it," she said. "This is enough to reopen your case." My heart raced, but so did the fear. Because the closer we got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. The threats inside prison escalated. A shiv left on my bunk. A fight staged in the yard that I barely walked away from. The guards shrugged it off as prison life, but I knew better. Someone wanted me silenced. Then came the night I nearly lost the garden. I woke to shouting and smoke. Someone had set fire to the little patch of soil I'd cultivated for years. Plastic containers melted, plants charred to black stubs. Inmates stood around, watching, some laughing, some shaking their heads. I dropped to my knees, scooping dirt with my bare hands, desperate to save something, anything. My hands blistered from the heat, but I didn't stop until the flames died. Only a few stubborn green shoots survived, clinging to life in the scorched earth. That night broke something in me. For years, I'd swallowed the injustice, told myself to endure, to wait. But watching my garden burn, watching the one thing that gave me meaning go up in flames, it was like reliving the estate fire all over again. Except this time, I refused to let them win. Claire filed the evidence with the court. The process was slow, tangled in bureaucracy and resistance. The Whitmores had money, influence, and lawyers who would fight tooth and nail to bury the truth. But the media was watching now, and pressure mounted. Other journalists picked up the story. Headlines shifted from "Prison Gardener Inspires Hope" to "Was he wrongfully convicted?" Strangers protested outside the prison, demanding justice. My name, once dragged through the mud, started to mean something different. The Whitmores went on television, painting me as a manipulator, saying the garden was just a stunt for sympathy. Watching them lie so easily made me sick, but it also confirmed what I already knew. They were scared. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted. I wasn't just the invisible gardener anymore. I was a problem they couldn't ignore. The breaking point came when Claire uncovered security footage from a gas station near the estate, dated the night of the fire. It showed the Whitmore son buying gasoline hours before the blaze. The timestamp blew holes in his alibi. When she showed it to me, I couldn't breathe. For years, I had replayed that night in my head, wondering how it all went so wrong. Now, finally, there was proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that someone else had lit the match. But with that proof came a new kind of fear. If the Whitmores were willing to sacrifice me, to lie under oath, to orchestrate an arson for money, what else were they capable of to protect themselves? Claire insisted on pushing forward. I begged her to be careful. She just said, if we stop now, they win. The garden slowly began to recover. New seedlings sprouted where the fire had scorched the earth. I tended to them with renewed purpose, each green shoot a reminder that survival was possible, even in ashes. The inmates noticed. They stopped laughing, stopped doubting. They started protecting the garden like it was theirs too. It became sacred ground, a place no one dared touch again. I realized then that the garden wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to all of us, every man who needed a reminder that life could still grow in a place designed to kill it. And maybe, just maybe, it would be the same for me. Maybe I could grow again, even after being burned to nothing. But before that could happen, the fight had to come to the surface. Court dates loomed, evidence piled up, and the story turned into a storm the Whitmores couldn't control. The truth was clawing its way out, and I could feel it. Something was about to break wide open. By the time my appeal was granted, the story had already outgrown me. It wasn't just about a gardener wrongfully convicted anymore. It was about corruption, greed, and how money bends the truth until it breaks. News vans camped outside the courthouse. Protesters held signs with my name scrawled across them, demanding justice. For years I'd been invisible, and now I was the center of a spectacle I never asked for. Walking into that courtroom in shackles again felt surreal. The last time I'd been there, I was nothing more than a disposable man, someone easy to blame. This time, I walked in with the weight of the country's eyes on me. The jury looked different too. They weren't indifferent. They were curious, almost uneasy, like they already sensed something had been rotten the first time around. Claire sat behind the defense table with my lawyers, a stack of evidence files in front of her. She caught my eye and nodded, calm but determined. Without her, I wouldn't even be here. Without her, I'd still be rotting in a cell, tending to a garden no one cared about. The prosecution tried to recycle the old story. Bitter servant, gasoline cans, resentment turned to arson. But this time, they weren't the only ones with a story. My lawyers laid out the evidence piece by piece, the bloated insurance policies, the unpaid debts, the contractors' emails, and finally, the gas station footage showing the Whitmore son buying fuel hours before the fire. Each piece landed like a hammer blow. I watched the Whitmores squirm on the witness stand. Mrs. Whitmore, her pearls tight around her neck, swore she believed I was guilty. But when asked about the sudden increase in insurance coverage, her voice cracked. The son, the smirking bastard who'd watched me get sentenced, stumbled through his testimony. His timeline didn't match the receipts, didn't match the footage, didn't match reality. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes instead of smug confidence. The prosecution fought hard, but the cracks were too deep to hide. Claire's reporting had made it impossible to vary. Every inconsistency was magnified under the spotlight. Every lie echoed louder than the last. I didn't testify. My lawyers said I didn't need to, and they were right. My words had already been written in the soil of that prison yard, in the leaves and roots that refused to die. The garden had spoken for me. When the verdict came, I didn't breathe until the foreman said the words, "Not guilty." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled, protesters cheered. My lawyers shook my hand like I'd just won a championship. I just sat there, stunned. Not guilty. Two words that should have come 10 years earlier, but finally, they were mine. The Whitmores weren't arrested that day, but investigations opened immediately. Fraud, arson, conspiracy, the walls were closing in on them. For the first time, justice wasn't a fantasy. It was real, clawing its way through the cracks. Walking out of that courthouse a free man didn't feel the way I thought it would. There was no triumphant music, no overwhelming joy. Just a hollow ache where 10 years of my life used to be. Freedom is strange when you've forgotten what it feels like. I breathed fresh air, but it didn't taste the same. I saw the sky without razor wire above it, but part of me still expected guards to bark orders. The world outside had moved on. Technology, neighborhoods, even the way people dressed, it all felt unfamiliar. But one thing hadn't changed. People wanted a story. Cameras followed me. Strangers shook my hand. Children handed me flowers. They wanted to believe in redemption, in survival. They wanted me to be a symbol. But I wasn't a symbol. I was a man who had lost a decade to lies. A man who had planted seeds in prison dirt just to stay alive. A man who wasn't sure what came next. That night, back in a cheap motel the lawyers had arranged, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I thought about the estate, about the fire, about the smirk on the Whitmore son's face. I thought about the garden, about the green shoots clawing their way through scorched soil. And I thought about what I would do now with the little time I had left. I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't done planting. Freedom didn't mean peace. The first weeks outside were harder than most of my years inside. I walked streets that felt foreign, breathed air that didn't smell like disinfectant and steel, yet I couldn't shake the weight of invisible chains. People congratulated me, called me brave, but at night I still woke up expecting bars, expecting the clanging of cell doors. The garden never left my mind. Not the estate gardens, not the scorched soil of prison, but the last image I carried, a stubborn green sprout pushing through ash. That plant saved me more than any lawyer, more than any reporter. It reminded me that life could claw its way back, no matter how many times it got burned down. I couldn't go back to being a gardener for the wealthy. I couldn't kneel in the dirt of someone else's property and pretend it mattered. So I started something different. With donations people had raised, and with the help of volunteers who believed in my story, I opened a public park on an abandoned lot in Hartford. Not fancy, not landscaped with precision, but real. A place for kids to dig their hands in soil, for families to sit under trees, for anyone to see that beauty doesn't have to hide behind gates. I named it Renewal Park because that's what it was for me, for the land, for anyone who needed it. The opening day was small. Just a handful of families, some reporters, a few ex-inmates who had written to me during my sentence. We planted trees together. I showed children how to press seeds into the earth, how to water them gently, how to wait. Watching their eyes widen at the first green shoots, I felt something break open in me. Not anger, not bitterness, something lighter. Something like healing. But I couldn't forget where it started. The prison warden reached out, told me the garden I'd built behind bars was still standing. They hadn't torn it up. In fact, they'd expanded it, made it part of a rehabilitation program for inmates. They even set up a plaque with my name, calling it Henry's Garden. I laughed when I heard that. For years, I'd been nothing but the gardener. Now they gave me the title like it was some honor. But still, I was glad they kept it alive. That patch of dirt had given hope to men who had nothing else. It deserved to stay. The Whitmores faced their own reckoning. The son was indicted, the family's reputation crumbled, and the estate, what was left of it, was seized to pay debts. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt tired. Nothing they lost could give me back the 10 years stolen from me. Justice is never clean. It's jagged, messy late. But it was something. Sometimes I visit the prison garden. I stand by the fence, watching men kneel in the dirt the way I once did. They don't always recognize me. To them, I'm just an old man staring too long at the soil. That's fine. The garden isn't mine anymore. It belongs to them. To anyone who needs proof that life can grow even in the darkest places. When people ask me what I learned, I don't give them speeches. I don't talk about forgiveness or destiny or any of that nonsense. I tell them the truth. The world will burn you down if it has to, and no one will care until it makes a good story. But if you can find something, anything to keep alive, you can outlast the fire. My garden was just plants in the dirt, but it was also everything. And now, when I walk through Renewal Park and hear children's laughter, when I see parents resting under the shade of trees we planted together, I know I didn't just survive. I built something that will outlive me. That's all I ever wanted. Not glory, not headlines, just roots that no one can rip out. So if you're listening to this, if you made it to the end of my story, do me a favor, plant something. Doesn't matter where, backyard, balcony, a cracked sidewalk. Put something in the ground and watch it fight its way up. You'll see what I mean. And if this story meant something to you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like mine, raw, real, and unforgettable.